So I've now beaten Lies of P twice, with the second playthrough being on New Game Plus. I also didn't use any summons on either playthrough, so I feel like I've seen enough of the game to do a full ranking of all the bosses. And this video is focused on ranking them from easiest all the way up to the most difficult. Throughout the game, you'll encounter a variety of different boss types, and one of those types is the Stalkers. These are very similar to the Hunters from Bloodborne, but I think they're much easier overall. It could be my experience with Bloodborne factoring in here, but on my first playthrough, I think I maybe only died once or twice to them throughout the entire game. The easiest one is probably the Mad Donkey, who comes in at number 25 on our list, and he also happens to be the first Stalker boss you run into. Maybe these fights are a bit tough for newcomers, but as soon as you learn how to effectively use the backstab mechanic, you can completely destroy this guy. And even if you can't nail the backstab consistently, you're fine to just strafe around him until there's an opening, or even just hold your block button and then get your health back when you attack. Of course, if you're good at the perfect guard mechanic, the fight is even easier, and that's true for every fight on this list. And I think maybe one of the reasons that so many people are saying this game is harder than the Souls games, because hitting that perfect guard is incredibly important for so many of the bosses on this list. By the time you reach our next boss, you're pretty leveled up and should also have a much better understanding of the game. Black Cat has a long spear to hit you from range, so it can help if you have something to match that distance. He does a lot of poking and jabbing with the spear, but you can pretty easily jump aside or move away when he tries to hit you. He is quick and has a lot of side-to-side movement, but there are plenty of breaks in between, which means there's a lot of time to attack. And I should point out, his difficulty drops to 0 if you choose to give him a gold coin fruit. That's right, you can avoid this fight entirely if you want. I didn't fight him at all on my first playthrough, but even on New Game Plus, he really wasn't a problem at all. Here we have another optional Stalker boss in the Atoned. If you have the Stalker's Promise, which you get from another boss, you can show her the Stalker's Greeting and pass without a fight. If you do nothing though, she'll attack and the fight begins. She wields a big pickaxe and can make your weapon weaker over time thanks to decay, which is one of the more annoying status effects in the game. She's fast, but her moves are pretty standard. If you're far away, she'll eventually run in to attack you, and this is going to give you a chance to get behind her for some hits of your own, including a powerful backstab. I didn't fight her at all in my first playthrough, but did on New Game Plus and was still able to handle the fight pretty easily. Speaking of the Stalker's Greeting, the character you need to fight to get this is the Survivor. He's pretty quick and has a long sword that can hit you from decent range. It also doesn't help that you fight him in a pretty tight space. It's really more about dealing with a small room here, as the fight plays out similarly to the other Stalker fights. You can also get those backstabs on him for big time damage, which can help in the fight pretty quickly. Another optional Stalker boss you meet in a very tight space is the Owl Doctor. He uses a bone cutting saw and a dagger. The saw is faster than it looks, plus he also does a lot of jump attacks. Again, moving around in a small room and keeping him in front of you is key to this fight. Of course, you can circle behind him for the backstabs, and this general side-to-side movement is pretty helpful for avoiding his combos too. There's also this annoying pillar that you have to contend with, but there are some weapons like the Puppet Ripper, for example, that allow you to use it to your advantage. If you're too far away, he might throw his dagger, plus he does have an unblockable attack that you'll need to be ready for. Next, we have Puppet of the Future, and you'll encounter a handful of these throughout the game. Honestly, this is one I don't even consider a boss. I'm including it on the list because running into one does trigger the boss health meter, but he really just feels like a very large standard enemy. The first time you run into one, he's in this pool of corruption, so you're better off skipping the fight at first until you find a lever that's in a nearby workshop. This is going to clear up that corruption and make the fight much easier. The Puppet's not very quick. He does have strong attacks, but as long as you don't get too greedy, this should be an easy fight. Everything is telegraphed well ahead of time. You can stay close to its legs or its heels and just step back when you see him lift. It does take a bit to whittle down his health, but as long as you're patient, this fight isn't any trouble. At number 19, we have the Robber Weasel boss, and this is one of the first Stalker fights that actually felt a bit challenging, even if it pales in comparison to the bosses coming up. She has this fiery axe, and some of her attacks can be a little bit tricky to avoid. She also has this throwing attack, which you can guard against, but the timing is a little hard to predict. If she hits you with the throwing attack, she'll almost certainly dash in with her axe right after. Getting behind her for a backstab is possible, but her quick movement makes that a bit more challenging than with some of the other Stalkers. I did still take her out on the first try, but she was certainly the first Stalker fight that actually made me sweat a little bit. The Parade Master is a giant mechanical puppet that looks like a circus leader. He blocks the way to Hotel Krat and is the first main boss you'll encounter. As a result, he's not too crazy difficult. Don't get me wrong, this is still a Souls-like, and he has plenty of attacks that can end the fight in just a few hits, but overall, this fight is a nice boss introduction to help ease new players into the game. Given his size, the attacks are pretty predictable. He'll charge, stomp, punch, and smash in effort to take you out. For the first half of the fight, you can dodge out of the way or even land some perfect guards to get things started on the right foot. If he goes for the big slam with his whole body and you're able to land a perfect guard against it, this opens him up for a flurry of attacks as it takes him a bit to get back up. Once you're halfway through the fight, he'll rip off his own head and use it as a mace to do even stronger, more aggressive attacks. If If you time your attacks though just right and land a few perfect guards, you'll take him out in short order. Black Cat was lower on our list, but his sister Red Fox is a different story. If you chose to fight Black Cat, then this fight with Red Fox is unavoidable. But if you gave the gold coin fruit, you can skip this fight completely as well. The fight happens near the end of the game in a long but narrow space just outside Geppetto's prison cell. I didn't do this fight at all on my first playthrough, but I can say on the New Game Plus playthrough, these attacks hit pretty hard. She fights with a curved saber and has some pretty quick attacks. The combos can be tough to time just right, and at least on New Game Plus, your health can just melt away quickly if she finds the right opening. Because the area is somewhat narrow, you again have to be aware of your surroundings and try not to get backed against a wall. It helped me to be a bit more patient and go for light attacks instead of trying to always land the big hit. And like all the other stalkers, she can be hit with a backstab, which you should be going for at every opportunity. And for our final stalker fight on the list, we have the White Lady at number 16. She has a pretty interesting backstory in that she had dreams of becoming an opera singer. You see, she was part of a performing duo with her sister, Adelina, a singer that you can meet elsewhere in the game, but not as a boss fight. Adelina lost her ability to sing due to the petrification disease, and now her sister is seeking revenge. As for the fight, you can score a few easy hits right away if you're ready. She's using a rapier and attacks quickly with thrusts and slashes. She's pretty good at moving around and always tries to stay in front of you, which can make backstabs a little bit more difficult in this fight. Her moves are fast and can be tough to avoid, especially when she does a combo. She also has this charge attack that gives her even more reach, so you really have to start learning to identify that and be ready for it. Fortunately, this fight has plenty of space to move around, so you can definitely use that to your advantage and take time to heal when you get hit. The Walker of Illusions is a boss that I beat on my first try, and I would probably put him more into the category of a mini boss instead of a main boss, but he is still required to progress. He has a long sword in one hand and a dagger in the other, which he'll use to do a series of quick strikes and slashes, often in a combo. Timing is everything in this fight. If you can land perfect guards, the whole fight becomes much easier, but that's pretty much true for all the bosses in this game. This one, I feel like it's even more important though because of the close quarters. Of course, landing those perfect guards is easier said than done. You do not have to worry about a second phase here, but halfway through the fight, he'll make a copy that you also have to deal with. Fortunately, the clone doesn't have too much health, so I made sure to take that one out as soon as it appeared. Like some of the other fights on our list, the arena does play a key role in how the fight plays out. Like I said, you're in pretty close quarters here, so there aren't too many chances to escape and heal if you take too many hits, which makes the perfect guarding that much more important. The Corrupted Parade Master is like the Parade Master you meet at the start of the game, but now it's overtaken by corruption, which makes for a slightly more challenging fight. This time he starts with the mace weapon from the beginning, but overall the attacks are pretty much the same. Most of the attacks are with the mace, he swings it around and can do a bunch of hits in a row. The biggest difference now is that it can inflict decay and also spawn additional enemies in the arena. I'm not really sure what these things are called, but they remind me of some corrupted version of Groot. Fortunately, they're pretty slow and don't have a lot of health, but they are another element that you'll need to account for in the fight. If they do happen to catch you, they can deal a lot of damage, so you can't completely ignore them. Like before, you should be aggressive in between the Corrupted Parade Master's attacks, and there should be multiple stagger opportunities if you're doing that, which of course opens him up for an even bigger attack. The Door Guardian is a lot more intimidating than he actually is. His attacks definitely hit like a truck, and in return, it can seem like your attacks aren't dealing much damage. He uses his fists to punch and smash, which can hit you with the shock status effect. This is the one that makes you lose stamina, so you definitely want to watch out for that. The big punches are slow though, so you can usually dodge or perfect guard against them. The strategy that worked best for me is to simply focus all my hits on his right leg. They don't do much damage on their own, but after a time you'll get him into a groggy state and then follow up with that fatal attack, which does massive damage against this guy. Just outside of our top 10, we have the Scrapped Watchman. He's found in the courtyard of Krat City Hall early in the game, and it's likely he's the first real challenge for most players. The demo they released before launch actually let you play all the way up to him, and a lot of players found him pretty difficult to deal with, especially considering how early you run into him. He uses these long arms to attack and move around. He can also jump quickly to get in close and hit you with his arm. The attacks can seem like they're coming from all different directions, especially when you first start going against him. But like all of the bosses, there are patterns, and you'll begin to notice these over time. My Souls experience definitely came into play big time here. He gave me some trouble in the demo, but in my first real playthrough, I was ready for him and made it through quickly. You'll start to recognize that his main go-to combo has him do this little wind-up with his right arm, then another with his left, then a big slam in the middle. You'll want to try and hit perfect guards against all three of these. If you can do that, then you'll have a nice opening for an attack and may even stagger him in the process. And this is also going to be helpful for another boss coming up on this list just a bit later. Then once he gets into the second half of the fight, he uses more electric attacks, including one that you'll need to just completely back away to avoid. And I would say that after a few attempts, you should probably have the timing down, as many of these attacks do have pretty easy to spot tells. King's Flame Fuoco is next on our list, and this is one of the bosses that feels really hard at first, but after a bit, you realize he's not too bad. At least that's how it went for me. You're in a good-sized arena here, and there are also all these pillars that you can use for cover, even if he can take them out with his charge attack. Like so many bosses in Lies of P, though, it definitely pays to be aggressive here. There are a few attacks of his that if you get behind him, you can just avoid those attacks entirely and just keep attacking him. Fuoco's main attacks are punches and swings, and you should be able to block or dodge most of these. When he's about to use his fire moves, like shooting fireballs or a flamethrower, you want to stay close. If you back away, he's going to charge. Now, with all of those fire attacks, he can inflict overheat. In fact, there's one attack in particular that when you see him readying up for, it's best to just get as far away as you can. This also might be one of the first fights where you'll really want to think about the other items in your inventory. And just in general, I would say in Lies of P, don't sleep on the extra items. The shot put can be incredibly helpful, not just in this fight, but in many fights. When you get things into a groggy state, if you throw a shot put, that is basically like a heavy attack right there and will immediately set them up for a fatal strike. For this particular fight, though, the attribute Purification Ampoule, I think is how you say that, that can be used to immediately remove overheat, so that's one that you might want to have quick access to. Taking our number 10 spot is the first battle you have with the eldest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. This fight is really all about fighting multiple enemies at once. You end up doing battle against all 4 members of the Brotherhood, but in this fight, they attack in sequences instead of all at once. The eldest brother has a huge blade for his weapon and heavy-hitting combos to go along with it. The spin attack he does can take you out incredibly fast, but it's also one of the best opportunities to land multiple perfect guards in a row if you can nail that timing. So as you progress through the fight, the other members kind of take turns joining in to help out Big Brother. And I think he definitely gets less aggressive when they're out on the battlefield, so for me, it wasn't too hard to kind of lure them away, take them out, and then go back to fighting the eldest. The Mad Clown Puppet is probably the most difficult mini-boss in the game. You'll find the optional boss near the Estella Opera House in the Entertainment District. I didn't even know this my first time through, but I took a chance on just running past him to see if I could reach another checkpoint, and that's exactly what happens. In fact, you can skip the fight entirely by running past him up the stairs and around the building to hit your next Stargazer. Even if you don't want to skip him though, running around like this makes the fight a bit easier. By unlocking that checkpoint, you can refresh your health and then backtrack to where the clown is positioned. This will let you score at least a few hits before he really gets going with those attacks. Once he does start attacking though, you'll see he has a variety of different punches, including a really long-range punch that can deal a ton of damage. And even if you block this with a perfect guard, because you're so far away, it's going to be hard to land a follow-up attack. He also has an annoying spin attack and another where he lunges at you with his stomach, which that one for some reason for me was just really hard to get a read on it. This is definitely one of those fights where if you go into it too overconfident, you might be surprised at how many times he keeps taking you out. The Fallen Archbishop Andreas is another boss fight that would fit perfectly in Bloodborne. He's a massive, hulking, grotesque creature who charges at you in different ways and even uses his tongue for a whip-like attack. By this point in the game, I was really starting to see how much easier it made these fights when I could consistently perfect guard. In this one, it did take me a bit to get all of his attack patterns down, but once I did, I tried to land perfect guards at every opportunity. This really helps to get to that second phase as quickly as possible. Also, the Flame Grindstone as well as the Flame Legion Arm, you can use those in either phase and they're going to be pretty helpful. I really enjoyed the mechanic here of phase 2 of the fight because now he can attack you from either side of his body. Depending on which side you're on, it's almost like fighting a totally different enemy because the attacks are so different. Now, I feel like most people will do what I tried to do, is since you're already familiar with his beast side, you want to get to that side at every opportunity. The attacks, they're a little bit different, but similar enough that I preferred to go to that side as soon as I had the chance. There are a few moments when he'll try to get you to face the other side, but I just kept sprinting to that beast side as much as I could. Once I started using that strategy, it wasn't long before I got the victory. At number 7, we have our second run-in with the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. This time you need to beat all of them to win, and they each have a full health bar. Fortunately, they don't have much health. Plus, you can also backstab each of them, so I went for that as much as possible. On their own, they're really not very tough. The difficulty of this fight is in the various status effects that they can inflict, and try to make sure that you keep them isolated for those one-on-one fights. The Battle Maniac has a red scarf and uses a sword, plus he also has fire attacks that can cause overheat. He always seemed to be the most aggressive one in my fights, but that could just be random, I'm not sure. The youngest wears a hood and uses 2 swords. She kicks and slashes, but can also hit you with decay, which again, that is really one of the most annoying status effects to deal with. So for sure, I get why a lot of guides recommend that you try and take her out first. Eccentric is the one with the bucket on his head and a long spear. He does electric damage, and I have to say he was the easiest one in all of my fights. The real key in this fight is taking out one of them as soon as possible, then whittling down the health of the other 2 until they're both close to death. Basically, you want to get them to the point where you can take out both of them in very rapid succession. This is going to make it so you can face the eldest brother in a one-on-one situation. You see, he's actually triggered to resurrect once you've eliminated 2 of the others. So what you want to avoid is a situation where you're having to face off against one of the original 3 plus the eldest brother at the same time. Once I figured this out, it made the fight much easier, as the eldest on his own is pretty close to how he was in that first fight with most of the same attacks. The green monster of the swamp and his second phase, the puppet devouring green monster, land at number 6 for this list. You'll encounter this required boss in the barren swamp. It mostly uses its hands, or tentacles I guess you would call these, to attack. He's got swipes and smashes, but he also has these decay-inflicting attacks, and those can be pretty difficult to dodge. If you're too far away, he may do this charge attack, which can at first seem overwhelming. I quickly learned though that you can perfect guard against this, which of course gives you a big opening to attack. In fact, if I ever needed some breathing room, I didn't mind this attack at all. I would actually retreat on purpose to try and bait that attack out, because once I figured out the timing, that was one that I could pretty consistently get the perfect guard on. Now, one that I could not get consistently is this move where he burrows underground and then leaps back out after a time. You can kind of see him approaching, rolling underneath the ground. The best thing I could figure out was to roll back at the last possible second just before I knew he was about to leap out, but even that didn't seem to work 100% of the time. I also used a lot of fire in this fight, and once again, aggression is the name of the game here. The first phase does have a full health bar, but once you take him out, you'll move to phase 2, where he puts on the armor of a previous boss, the Scrapped Watchman. Yep, remember how I said it was going to be important to learn his attacks? You see, in doing so, he actually takes on some of that boss's attacks, but now with a few additions thanks to all those tentacles underneath. He can take these really big jumps now, but he still does a lot of punching and clawing. But fortunately, one of the attacks that he brings over from that Watchman fight is that little wind-up move. The one where he winds up right, winds up left, and then does the big slam in the middle. I often found this was the best opportunity to get some big damage on him, provided of course that my timing was on point with those perfect guards. Now, one slight difference at the end of that attack this time is he's going to throw in this little tentacle sweep. It extends outward at the very end of that combo, right after the big slam, but you should be able to avoid that by staying directly in front of him when you set up for the perfect guard. The King of Puppets is one of my favorite boss fights in the entire game. This fight just has everything you want to see in a good boss fight. You'll run into him inside the Estella Opera House, and the fight starts with this giant mech-like puppet. He uses his long arms to attack, often in these big sweeping motions, and with those arms he has a really long reach. Again, I found it best to stay up close and aggressive as much as possible. Once the giant puppet is destroyed, we move to the second part of the fight and see there was actually a human inside, Romeo, the King of Puppets. He uses a scythe, which has a good amount of range on it, plus just a wider array of attacks in general. He's now more aggressive outside the mech, he has quick movement, and can even get away fast if you try and chase him down with too much aggression. When I first ran into Romeo, I was trying to perfect guard everything. Like always, if you can do this consistently, it's absolutely the way to go. However, at this point in the game, I don't know, I was just not able to consistently pull it off. Some of these attacks in the second phase were just a little bit too tricky. Once I stopped trying to perfect guard everything though, and started using more dodges, specifically left dodges, the fight became so much easier. He has this really strong move in the second phase with a quick series of fiery attacks, but even these can mostly be avoided with a few dodges to the left. After a few tries against him, I definitely felt like this fight might take me a while to finish, but shifting my strategy to more dodges just made the second half so much easier. The next fight is one I didn't feel like should be that hard. None of his attacks here are anything all that out of the ordinary, but the truth is simply that Champion Victor hits like a tank, and he's built like a tank. For such a large, hulking figure, his attacks are really quick, plus they aren't easy to predict. It took me getting grabbed and slammed several times before I noticed he always says something before going for that grab attack, which can just absolutely shred your health if you get caught by it. And if you're going for perfect guards and you miss too many times, it's easy to quickly run out of heals against him. On the plus side though, this is one of the few fights in the game where I thought that the first phase was much harder than the second. Once you get to phase 2, he'll remove his attachments, but still uses punches and charge attacks. He does seem a bit slower in this phase though, and I didn't feel like there was enough new in that second phase to make it more difficult, and by the time I actually was reaching that phase consistently, I had such a good handle on phase 1 that it really didn't give me too much trouble. Simon Manus, Awakened God. Now this is a really interesting one here at number 3 on our list. You see, I actually had two very different experiences with this guy. My first playthrough and then my New Game Plus playthrough. If I based things only on my first go, I would have had him ranked much lower. You see, I made it to his second phase in just my very first attempt and then beat the boss on my second try. I could see how he could cause people some problems, but I just didn't understand some of the other lists I was seeing out there that had him ranked pretty high. That second attempt when I beat him, honestly, I think I just got lucky. I don't even think I had enough time to see all of his attacks, because meeting up with him again in New Game Plus was a completely different story. I died on this one again and again and again. In the first phase, he uses this giant mace to swing at you. It's pretty slow, but because he's so big, there's a lot of range on these swings. Again, calling back to my experience playing Bloodborne, this boss felt like he'd be right at home there. In the Awakened God phase, which is his second phase, he gains new powers like these powerful wind gusts. He can summon golden beams that hit you with disruption. And this disruption is the worst status effect in the game. It's worse than decay. You see, disruption is the one where if the meter fills completely, you die instantly, no matter how much health you have. So you have to keep moving and dodging, but then while he's shooting these beams, he'll very often start hitting you with other attacks while they're still raining down on you. Even when I could make it to his second phase consistently on New Game Plus, he would just overwhelm me with all these different magical attacks, some of which can hit you from anywhere in the arena. Then you combine that with this attack where he flies high into the air, sometimes at such an angle that the camera freaks out and you can't even see him. It just makes for a really tough phase 2. And on New Game Plus, these attacks at this late game stage are hitting so hard that you need to heal basically after you get hit even once. The Nameless Puppet is technically an optional boss fight, which is a bit strange considering that it will likely be the final boss in the game for most people. After you defeat Simon, you'll take the elevator down and meet up with Geppetto. Oh, and these are some pretty big story spoilers coming up, but hopefully you wouldn't have watched this far if you were worried about spoilers. So Geppetto asks for your heart to resurrect his son, Carlo, but as long as you've told at least a few lies throughout the game, you'll have the option to refuse. This starts your battle with the Nameless Puppet. He fights with a long sword and uses a series of swinging and slashing attacks. Unsurprisingly, these combos come in rapid succession, and only with time and memorization will you be able to perfect guard against them. If you stay too far away, the puppet will dash and follow up with a quick attack. Also, he actually has the ability to heal during this first phase. I've heard he can do this up to 2 times. I only ever saw him do it once though. Like most of the other phase 2 fights though, this is when the difficulty really ramps up. Now the puppet is even faster, can wield 2 swords, and has attacks that hit from even further away. It's more aggressive in this phase and charges at you frequently. This is also a great opportunity to use the Perfection Grindstone, which is the one that gives you guaranteed perfect guards for a short time. If you've never used this grindstone, you're missing out. It is incredibly OP, even though it only lasts a short time, and enables you to perfect guard against any attack by simply holding the block button. There were also 2 amulets that really made a big difference for me, especially when I was going through my New Game Plus run. The Assassin's Amulet, which increases your critical attack, as well as the Puppet Destroyer's Amulet, which increases the damage you do against puppets. Like Simon, this fight was way more challenging on my New Game Plus run just because of how much harder these attacks hit. And depending on your defense and overall health, I mean, there are a few attacks that can take you out in one hit. At number 1, and this probably isn't a surprise to anyone who's played the game, it's Laxasia the Complete. What's funny is not only do I think this is the toughest boss, it's also my favorite fight in the entire game. And if you think about it, that's a really difficult thing to do. To make a boss fight that can punish you time and time again, but at the same time you still respect and even enjoy the battle. Laxasia starts the fight wearing full body armor, and she carries a massive sword which can deal electric shock damage. She swings the sword in a variety of different ways, like chopping down and adding an electric shock at the end. She also has regular sword moves like swinging, sweeping, and slashing, and because the sword is so massive, all of these attacks have quite a bit of range to them. And while it's true for several fights in this game, this is by far the most important fight to learn her attack patterns and land those perfect guards. You can make the first phase of this fight so much easier once you land them consecutively. Acid also helps out a ton as it can take out the shield in just a couple of hits. Phase 2 though is when the real fight begins. First we get this gorgeous cutscene showing Laxasia removing the armor and changing her sword. Now she moves faster and doesn't give you much time at all to even breathe. She kicks off this phase with a flurry of long-range lightning attacks which you can deflect back at her with a perfect guard. This is like old school Ocarina of Time but on steroids right here. Then she ends that series of moves with this lightning quick dive bomb that's incredibly difficult to perfect guard against. She's so far away and there are so many other things just kind of flashing in your vision, it's hard to see when she starts the dive to actually know when you need to guard. I only guarded against this successfully a handful of times. That is until I started saving my Perfection Grindstone for the very beginning of Phase 2. This helped me to consistently start phase 2 with a good amount of damage, plus not taking any damage myself. As much as I love all the special effects, and that's part of what makes this fight so great, all the lightning around you, at the same time, I do think it makes things a little bit harder to see, harder to know exactly when you should perfect guard. Then again, maybe that's just my excuse for not being able to get good against the deathly quick attacks in the second phase. Because even with getting that solid head start thanks to the grindstone, this fight took me a ridiculous number of tries to finally get by. And all the while, I never ended up hating the fight or feeling like it was too cheap. I'm happy to say, New Game Plus was a completely different story, and it only took me a handful of tries to take her out. So I must have learned something from all those failed attempts my first go-round. I'm planning to make a full video about my run to get the Platinum Trophy in this game. Once that's ready, I'll link it here on the left side of the screen. Until then, you can check out my trophy hunt for Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is certainly a much easier game than Lies of P. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.